The siren's call cut through the cerulean waters of the Caribbean with practiced ease, its sleek white hull gleaming under the late afternoon sun. At the helm, Jack Holden adjusted their heading with one hand while the other clutched a glass of champagne. His wife Emma stood at the bow, her dark hair whipping in the salt-laden breeze, her sundress a flash of crimson against the endless blue horizon. To 10 years, Jack called out, raising his glass. Emma turned, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The trip had been his idea, a grand romantic gesture to salvage what they both knew was slowly slipping away. 10 years of marriage had left them wealthy but distant, successful but empty, living parallel lives in their sprawling Miami mansion. The yacht was top of the line, a 45-foot luxury vessel equipped with every modern convenience and safety feature money could buy. Jack had spent weeks planning the perfect anniversary cruise through the Bahamas, plotting a course that would take them through the heart of the infamous Bermuda Triangle. Emma had rolled her eyes at that detail. She'd always been the practical one, dismissing such mysteries as tourist trap nonsense. As the sun began to set, the weather changed with unsettling speed. Dark clouds materialized seemingly from nowhere, transforming the brilliant Caribbean sky into an oppressive ceiling of slate gray. The wind picked up and the previously calm seas began to churn. "We should radio in our position," Emma said, making her way carefully back to the cabin. "This doesn't feel right." Jack nodded, already reaching for the radio. The sophisticated communication system crackled to life, but instead of the clear channel he expected, an otherworldly cacophony of sounds filled the cabin. It was like nothing he'd ever heard before, discordant tones and frequencies that seemed to penetrate his skull, making his teeth ache. "Mayday, mayday," he attempted, fighting down a surge of panic. "This is the siren's call. Coordinates." The numbers on their GPS display began to flutter and spin, rendering their position meaningless. Every electronic device on board went haywire simultaneously, depth finders showing impossible readings, radar displays dissolving into abstract patterns. Emma grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Jack, look." The fog that had been gathering around them was unlike any natural phenomenon they'd ever encountered. It glowed from within with a sickly phosphorescence, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost intelligent. The water beneath the yacht had turned black as ink, and as they watched in horror, it began to move in ways that defied physics, flowing upward, spiraling in impossible geometries. "Get the life jackets," Jack ordered, fighting the wheel as the current tried to wrench it from his grasp. But Emma stood transfixed, staring out the cabin window. Her face had gone chalk white. "There's something out there," she whispered, "in the fog. It's watching us." The last transmission picked up from the siren's call was a burst of staticky interference punctuated by screams that sound engineers would later swear didn't sound entirely human. When the Coast Guard reached their last known coordinates 12 hours later, they found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no sign that the yacht or its passengers had ever existed. The search continued for weeks, with crews combing thousands of square miles of ocean. Reporters descended on Miami, hungry for details about the wealthy couple who had vanished into thin air. Theories proliferated: mechanical failure, rogue waves, criminal hijacking, but none could explain the complete absence of wreckage or the strange radio transmissions that preceded their disappearance. Eventually, the Holdens were declared legally dead, joining the long list of victims claimed by the Triangle's mysterious waters. Their case file was archived alongside hundreds of others, gathering dust as the years rolled by. But something had changed in that patch of ocean. Local fishermen reported odd lights in the fog, and late at night, some swore they could hear a woman's voice carried on the wind, singing in languages that had never existed on this earth. The triangle had claimed another prize, and it had only just begun to reveal its true nature. Liam Gallagher hunched over his desk in the dim light of his cramped Houston apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents, weather reports, and nautical charts. His walls were covered in photos and newspaper clippings, red string connecting seemingly unrelated incidents spanning decades. At the center of it all was a faded photograph of Emma and Jack Holden, smiling on the deck of the Siren's Call just days before their disappearance. 5 years had passed since the Holdens vanished, but for Liam, their case was anything but cold. What had started as a routine assignment for the Houston Chronicle had evolved into an all-consuming obsession. He'd spent countless nights poring over similar disappearances, tracking patterns that his colleagues either couldn't or wouldn't see. His laptop screen glowed with dozens of open tabs, technical analysis of radio transmissions, meteorological data, witness accounts from other incidents. Dark circles under his eyes testified to another sleepless night spent chasing connections. His editor had long since given up on getting him to write about anything else, relegating him to freelance status with a weary shake of her head. "You're wasting your talent on conspiracy theories," she'd told him during their last meeting. "The triangle, really? Next you'll be hunting Bigfoot." But Liam knew he was onto something. The radio transmissions were the key, not just from the Siren's Call, but from dozens of other vessels and aircraft that had vanished in the same area. He'd spent months analyzing the recordings, and the patterns were undeniable. He pulled up the audio file from Flight 19, the infamous squadron of Navy bombers that disappeared in 1945. Beneath the static and distortion, there was a signature frequency, a subtle modulation that appeared in case after case. The same frequency appeared in the Siren's Call's final transmission, and in the last radio contact from the SS Marine Sulphur Queen in 1963. The implications were staggering. These weren't random disappearances. They were evidence of something systematic, something that operated according to its own bizarre logic. The triangle wasn't just swallowing ships and planes, it was communicating with them first. The Florida Keys stretched out before Liam like a string of emeralds scattered across azure waters. He guided his rental car down a narrow road on Marathon Key, mangroves creating tunnels of dappled shadows. The address he sought lay at the end of a shell-strewn driveway, a weathered beach house perched on stilts, its wooden siding bleached gray by countless seasons of salt and sun. Olivia Martinez hadn't responded to his emails or phone calls, but Liam knew she was his best chance at understanding what happened to her sister Emma. The local mailman had confirmed she still lived here, though she rarely ventured out except for early morning walks on the beach. He climbed the stairs to the wraparound porch, noting the wind chimes made of sea glass and bleached driftwood. Before he could knock, a voice came from behind him. "I knew someone like you would come eventually." Liam turned to find a woman in her early 50s standing at the bottom of the stairs. She wore loose linen clothing and a wide-brimmed hat, a bag of groceries in her arms. Her resemblance to Emma Holden was striking, though grief had carved deep lines around her mouth and eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Liam Gallagher. I'm researching the triangle." She climbed the stairs, brushing past him to unlock the door. "Everyone wants to know about the triangle. Come in, Mr. Gallagher, but understand that some questions are better left unanswered." The interior of the house was cool and dim, filled with the scent of sage and sea air. Olivia led him to a kitchen that faced the water, where shells and curious pieces of coral lined every windowsill. She busied herself making tea, her movements precise and deliberate. "Emma called me the night before they left," she said suddenly, her back still turned. She was afraid, not of the boat or the weather. She said she'd been having dreams. Liam leaned forward. "What kind of dreams?" She saw herself underwater, but she could breathe. She said there were lights in the depths and voices that sang to her in languages she'd never heard. Olivia's hands trembled as she set a mug of tea before him. "I told her to cancel the trip." Jack had already been distant, drinking too much, staying late at the office. She thought the cruise would fix things, but she trailed off, staring out at the ocean. "The night they disappeared, I felt it. I woke up screaming, soaking wet though all the windows were closed. When the Coast Guard called the next day, I already knew." Mrs. Martinez, I've found patterns in these disappearances. The radio transmissions. Stop. Her voice cracked like a whip. You think you're the first to go digging, to find patterns. There were others before you, Mr. Gallagher. They went out there with their theories and their equipment. Some of them never came back. The ones that did, she shuddered. They were changed. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface carved with intricate spiral patterns. This washed up 3 months after Emma disappeared. I found it during one of my walks. Inside was a silver necklace Liam recognized from photos of Emma Holden. The metal was tarnished in strange ways, forming patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The clasp was still fastened, Olivia said quietly, as if it had phased right through her neck. And look at the chain. Liam examined it closer. The links weren't broken. They were twisted in ways that defied metallurgy, as if the silver had briefly turned liquid and reformed in impossible configurations. Whatever took my sister, it wasn't natural. It wasn't a storm or a mechanical failure. There are things out there in the deep parts of the ocean, Mr. Gallagher. Ancient things, patient things. They've been watching us, learning about us, and sometimes... She closed the box with trembling fingers. Sometimes they reach out and take what they want. I need to know the truth, Liam insisted. People deserve to know what's happening out there. Olivia's laugh was bitter. The truth. You want to know what I think the truth is? I think that wasn't really Emma on that last radio transmission. I think whatever came through the receiver just wanted us to think it was her screaming. I think... She stopped, pressing her fingers to her temples. I think sometimes at night, I still hear her voice carried on the wind. But what she's saying, those aren't words any human tongue was meant to form. She gripped his wrist suddenly, her fingers surprisingly strong. Go home, Mr. Gallagher. Write your article about tragic accidents and mysterious weather patterns. Make up a rational explanation that lets people sleep at night. But don't go out there looking for answers. The triangle doesn't give up its secrets, it takes everything. But Liam could see it in her eyes. She knew he wouldn't listen. The same determination that had driven Emma to save her marriage would drive him out into those waters. The same force that had called to her was calling to him now, a siren song of mystery that couldn't be resisted. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Olivia stood on her porch, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. She raised her hand, not in farewell, but in warning, or perhaps blessing. For those about to confront the triangle's mysteries, perhaps they were the same thing. Captain Miguel Santos had seen enough in his 30 years on the water to know when something felt wrong. The lean, weathered Cuban-American stood at the helm of his charter boat, the Segunda Oportunidad, watching the morning sun struggle to pierce an unusually thick bank of clouds. Beside him, Liam Gallagher checked his equipment for the third time. Cameras, depth sensors, and electromagnetic field detectors that Santos suspected would be useless where they were headed. Last chance to turn back, amigo, Santos said, adjusting their heading. Weather service says there's a front moving in. But Liam barely heard him. His attention was fixed on the GPS coordinates, glowing on his tablet. The last known location of the siren's call. 5 years of research, dead ends, and ridiculed theories had led to this moment. In his pocket, Emma Holden's twisted necklace pressed against his leg, a cold reminder of what awaited in these waters. The morning progressed, and the sea began to change. The usual Caribbean blue darkened to something deeper, more opaque. Schools of flying fish burst from the water in panic, skittering across the surface as if fleeing some unseen pursuer. Santos muttered prayers under his breath, his hands tightening on the wheel. "Lo sientes?" he asked quietly. "Do you feel it?" Liam did. The air had become heavy, charged with an electric tension that made his fillings ache. His expensive equipment began to malfunction, compass needles spinning wildly, radio frequencies dissolving into weird harmonics that made his skin crawl. Then the fog came. It rolled in against the wind, against all natural law, a wall of luminous gray that swallowed the horizon. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere feet. The fog seemed almost solid, pressing against the windows with peculiar intent. Droplets of moisture ran upward on the glass, defying gravity. "We need to turn back," Santos announced, already spinning the wheel, but the Segunda Oportunidad didn't respond. The engines were running, they could hear them, but the boat remained stationary, as if gripped by some immense, invisible hand. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the windows in impossible patterns, fractals and spirals that replicated the twisted geometries of Emma's necklace. Their breath came out in clouds that moved with deliberate purpose, forming shapes that almost resembled faces before dissolving. "Mother of God," Santos whispered. The sea before them began to move, not with waves or current, but as if something vast was stirring beneath the surface. The black water began to rotate, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. A whirlpool was forming, but it was wrong. The spiral descended far deeper than the ocean floor should have allowed, and the walls of water stood at impossible angles. Liam's cameras clicked futilely, their memory cards corrupted by whatever force was warping reality around them. The whirlpool grew, its diameter now greater than the length of an aircraft carrier. At its center, there was not darkness, but a peculiar light, a phosphorescent glow that pulsed with horrible regularity, like the heartbeat of some cosmic beast. Santos grabbed Liam's arm. "Look." Shapes were moving in the fog, massive silhouettes that made no sense to the human eye. They seemed to shift between dimensions, at once impossibly huge and microscopically small. The air filled with a subsonic hum that rattled their bones and set their teeth on edge. "The coordinates," Liam gasped, checking his instruments one last time. "We're exactly where the siren's call disappeared." The whirlpool's rotation reached a fever pitch. The Segunda Oportunidad was caught in its pull, spinning toward the luminous center. Santos clung to the wheel, shouting prayers in Spanish, but the helm was useless now. They were in the grip of something far older and more powerful than any human technology. Liam saw something rise from the depths, a vast shape that might have been a hand, if hands were made of water and darkness and dimensional wrongness. It reached for their small boat with terrible purpose. The last thing he heard before consciousness fled was a woman's voice, carried on winds that smelled of deep ocean trenches and temporal displacement. "Welcome home, seeker." Everything went black. Consciousness returned to Liam like a reluctant tide, ebbing and flowing before finally depositing him on the shores of awareness. He lay on worn wooden planks that creaked with an odd rhythm, as if the ship beneath him was breathing. The air felt wrong, too thick, too resistant to his lungs, as if he were trying to breathe liquid mercury. When he opened his eyes, he saw stars, but they were all wrong. Constellations he'd never seen formed patterns that hurt his mind to contemplate. The moon hung bloated and discolored in the alien sky, its surface marked with shapes that might have been cities or the footprints of impossible beings. He was alone on the deck of what appeared to be an ancient sailing vessel, its timbers black with age and encrusted with barnacles that slowly pulsed with bioluminescence. The ship's rigging rose into the darkness like a web spun by geometric spiders, the ropes moving slightly even though there was no wind. There was no sign of Santos or the Segunda Oportunidad. The sea around the ghost ship was glass smooth and black as obsidian, reflecting the wrong stars with perfect clarity until it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the sky began. In the distance, other ships hung suspended in the darkness, vessels from every era of human maritime history, all trapped in this pocket dimension that lay behind the triangle's veil. The ghost ship's corridor twisted in ways that defied Euclidean geometry. Liam found himself passing the same cabin doors multiple times, though he'd sworn he was walking in a straight line. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light that emanated from the wood itself, casting shadows that moved independently of any source. His flashlight beam revealed nautical instruments frozen in time, sextants covered in crystalline growths, barometers whose mercury had turned to something that writhed and squirmed behind the glass. In the captain's quarters, he found a logbook whose pages were filled with entries that began in 18th century English but gradually devolved into spiraling glyphs that seemed to crawl across the paper. The last legible entry read, "They sing to us from the depths. God forgive me, but we're starting to sing back." A crash echoed from somewhere below decks. Liam spun around, his flashlight beam dancing across the corridor. The sound of footsteps followed, not the solid thump of boots on wood, but a wet, sliding sound, as if something was dragging itself across the planks. He retreated into the nearest cabin, pushing a heavy sea chest against the door. The room was small, dominated by a bunk, still made with sheets that had turned green with age, and something that might have been mold, if mold grew in fractal patterns that occasionally rearranged themselves. The temperature dropped suddenly, his breath fogging in the stagnant air. The shadows in the corners of the cabin began to deepen and coalesce, taking on substance and weight. The wet footsteps grew closer, accompanied now by a sound that might have been breathing, if breathing could somehow be done in reverse. Something scraped against the door, not knocks, but long, deliberate strokes, as if whatever was out there had far too many fingers, all of them too long and jointed in the wrong places. A voice drifted through the wood, and Liam felt his sanity strain at its impossible acoustics. "I know you're in there, Mr. Gallagher." The voice was male, once human, the words forming around sounds that a human throat should not have been able to produce. "We've been waiting for you. She's been waiting for you." The door began to splinter, the wood turning liquid at the points of contact with whatever pressed against it from the other side. The sea chest shifted as reality warped around it. 5 years, the voice continued, wet and hollow. 5 years we've drifted in her domain, feeding on those she sends us. But you're different. You sought us out, just like I once sought answers about the triangle's power. The door dissolved, and Liam found himself staring into what remained of Jack Holden's face. The man's once handsome features had been stretched and distorted, as if viewed through a lens of rippling water. His skin had the translucent quality of deep-sea creatures, pulsing with faint bioluminescence. Where his eyes should have been, there were only swirling vortexes of darker water. "Welcome to our realm," Jack said, his mouth opening far too wide, revealing row upon row of crystalline teeth. "Emma will be so pleased. She's learned so much about the spaces between dimensions, about the ancient ones who gave her this gift, and now she wants to share it with your world." Liam scrambled backward until he hit the cabin wall, his hand clutching Emma's necklace through his pocket. It was burning cold now, vibrating with frequencies that made his bones resonate. "The door between worlds is almost ready to open fully," Jack continued, his form rippling and shifting as he spoke. The triangle was just the beginning, a small tear in reality's fabric, but soon. He gestured with an arm that kept changing length, his fingers splitting and reforming like strands of kelp. "Soon Emma will tear down the barriers completely, and everyone will know the joy of transformation." Liam's mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing while clinging to his sanity. What are you? Jack's laugh was the sound of drowning. "We are becoming. Emma showed me the truth. Humanity is just a larval stage. The sea holds older, deeper wisdom. The beings that took us, that changed us. They're not monsters, Mr. Gallagher. They're midwives." He flowed into the room, his lower body dissolving into a churning mass of tentacles and currents. "I fought it at first, just as Emma did. But once you embrace the change, once you let the deep wisdom in," his face split in a smile that wrapped completely around his head. "It's beautiful, and now it's your turn to see." Liam threw himself toward the cabin's porthole. Through the green-tinged glass, he could see other shapes moving in the darkness between the ships, vast, geometric forms that seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist. The beings that had transformed the Holdens, perhaps, or something even older and stranger. "You can't escape," Jack said, almost kindly. "The only way out is through the change, through the transformation. Emma is waiting in the heart of her kingdom. She's going to help you understand, just as she helped me." In the moment before Jack's liquid fingers could grasp him, Liam smashed through the porthole. The glass shattered outward in slow motion, each shard catching the light of the wrong stars like frozen tears. He tumbled onto a lower deck that shouldn't have been there, the geometry of the ghost ship continuing to shift and morph around him. "We're all connected now," Jack's voice echoed from multiple directions at once. "One great consciousness spreading through the deep places. Emma holds us together, shapes us into something greater." Liam ran through an impossible maze of decks and passageways. Ghostly shapes flickered at the edge of his vision. Other victims of the triangle, perhaps, transformed into entities that his mind refused to fully process. He caught glimpses of faces pressed against portholes, features distorted by more than just the glass, silently mouthing warnings or prayers or madness. The ship groaned around him, the sound rising in pitch until it became a chorus of voices singing in harmonies that made his teeth vibrate. The deck beneath his feet began to ripple and flow. Behind him, he could hear Jack's wet laughter growing closer. "You're going the right way," Jack called. "She's drawing you to her. She's been drawing you here since you first read about our disappearance. Haven't you felt it? The pull, the dreams." And Liam had to admit he had. For 5 years, his obsession with the triangle hadn't been entirely his own. In his dreams, he'd heard singing, seen lights in deep water. Something had wanted him to find this place, to uncover its mysteries. He burst out onto what should have been the main deck, but was now a vast expanse of twisted timber that stretched into darkness. The whispering grew louder, and now he could make out words in languages that predated humanity, their meaning seeping into his mind like cold venom. In the distance, a massive shape rose from the black water, the wreck of the Siren's Call, but transformed. Its hull had been fused with pieces of other vessels, creating a grotesque palace of nautical wreckage. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along its surface in rhythms that might have been a heartbeat, or might have been something trying to communicate. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jack's voice was closer now. "That's where she waits, in the throne room she made from all the lost ships. She's become so much more than what she was. Let me show you." Liam felt something cold and wet wrap around his ankle. He looked down to see a tendril of living water, its surface reflecting fragments of Jack's transformed face. More tendrils rose from the deck, reaching for him with terrible purpose. "No more running," Jack said, his voice now coming from the water itself. "It's time to meet the Queen." The tendrils dragged Liam across the deck despite his struggles. As they approached the twisted wreck of the Siren's Call, he saw other figures emerging from the darkness. The missing crew of the Marine Sulphur Queen, pilots from Flight 19, centuries of lost souls transformed into aqueous horrors by whatever force ruled this realm. They formed an honor guard, their fluid bodies rippling in patterns that hurt Liam's eyes. The singing grew louder, and now he could feel it trying to rewrite his mind, trying to make him understand truths his human consciousness was never meant to grasp. Inside the Siren's Call, the walls were alive with pulsing coral formations that glowed with inner light. The former yacht's interior had been transformed into a vast chamber that seemed to extend into other dimensions. And there, on a throne made from the figureheads of a dozen ghost ships, sat what had once been Emma Holden. She retained a suggestion of her human form, but it was like looking at a reflection in troubled waters. Her body was composed of shifting currents and impossible geometries, her hair a mass of writhing tentacles that extended into shadows, where light behaved according to alien laws. When she opened her eyes, Liam saw the same swirling vortexes he'd seen in the Triangle's waters. "Welcome, Seeker," she said, her voice resonating through multiple dimensions at once. "I've been waiting so long to show someone the truth, to share what I've become." In the throne room of the dead ships, Emma's form continued to shift and change, each configuration more beautiful and terrible than the last. The walls rippled in sympathy with her movements, reality bending around her like light through deep water. "You see now, don't you?" she asked, rising from her throne in a motion that seemed to involve more directions than space should allow. "Why I had to bring you here. Someone had to understand. Someone had to witness." Liam struggled against the watery tendrils that held him, but they only tightened their grip. Around the chamber, the transformed victims of the Triangle watched with their vortex eyes, swaying to rhythms that emanated from Emma's impossible form. "The beings that took us," she continued, gliding closer. "They weren't hostile. They were liberators. For millennia, they've waited in the deep places, watching humanity crawl on the surface world, bound by 3 paltry dimensions. They showed me the truth, that reality is so much more fluid than we imagined." She gestured, and the chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the vast darkness beyond. Shapes moved in that darkness, geometric forms that folded through space in ways that made Liam's mind recoil. The ancient ones that had transformed Emma, perhaps, or something even older. "I've spent 5 years learning their ways," Emma said, her voice taking on harmonics that made Liam's vision blur. "Learning to reshape matter, to bend space, to transcend the limitations of human form. And now, She raised her arms, and the entire chamber seemed to tilt into an angle that shouldn't have existed. Now I'm ready to share this gift with everyone. The water around the ghost ships began to churn. Above them, the wrong stars started to spiral, forming a vortex in the sky that mirrored the whirlpool that had brought Liam to this realm. Reality was thinning, the barrier between dimensions stretching like a soap bubble about to burst. The triangle was just the beginning, Emma said, her form growing larger, more complex, a small tear in the fabric of space. But now, with your help, with your witnessing, I can tear down the walls completely. Let the ancient ones return to their dominion. Let humanity evolve into what it was always meant to become. The chamber continued to distort around them as Emma's power grew. The walls rippled like disturbed water, reflecting impossible colors and geometric patterns that seemed to be bleeding through from other dimensions. The transformed victims of the triangle joined their voices in an otherworldly chorus that made the fabric of reality vibrate in sympathy. Look, Emma commanded, her form now a towering pillar of living water and twisted geometry. Look at what will become. Liam saw visions in the swirling patterns of her body, cities transformed into coral formations that defied physics, oceans rising to claim the land, humanity evolving into fluid, multi-dimensional beings that swam through space-time like fish through water. It was beautiful in its alien horror, seductive in its promise of transcendence. You're mad, he whispered, but even as he said it, he felt the pull of her vision. The necklace in his pocket had grown so cold it burned. Emma laughed, the sound rippling through multiple dimensions. Madness is relative, seeker. Sanity is a cage built from 3 dimensions and linear time. I'm offering freedom. She reached for him with appendages that existed in geometries his mind couldn't process. Behind her, the rift between worlds grew wider, reality parting like curtains to reveal the void beyond. Vast shapes moved in that void, ancient beings stirring from their cosmic slumber, ready to reclaim their domain. The necklace, Jack's watery voice whispered from somewhere near Liam's ear. She bound part of her essence to it. That's why it found its way to her sister. That's why it called to you. Liam's fingers closed around the twisted silver chain. It vibrated with frequencies that made his bones resonate, and he could feel it trying to transform his flesh, trying to remake him in Emma's new image. Yes, Emma hissed, seeing his realization. You understand? The necklace is the key, the anchor point between dimensions. With your will added to mine, we can tear the rift wide open. Let everyone see the truth. Let everyone evolve. The chamber began to rotate, gravity shifting and realigning as space itself bent around Emma's power. The ghost ships groaned, their timbers warping as reality twisted. Through the growing rift, Liam could see the normal world, the triangle's waters under a natural sky, unsuspecting ships passing nearby. Emma raised her arms, her form growing even larger, more incomprehensible. The time has come. The ancient ones will return. The waters will rise. All will be transformed. In that moment, Liam understood what he had to do. The necklace wasn't just a key, it was a tether binding Emma to this realm, allowing her to maintain her transformed state. And like any tether, it could be broken. He pulled the necklace from his pocket. Its silver surface had become liquid, trying to flow up his arm, to merge with his flesh. Emma saw his intention and screamed, a sound that existed in frequencies that shattered several of the chamber's portholes. No, she cried, reaching for him with 1,000 liquid tentacles. You don't understand. I'm trying to save humanity. Some things, Liam gasped, fighting the necklace's influence, aren't meant to be saved. With the last of his human strength, he hurled the necklace toward the rift. Emma lunged for it, her form stretching across impossible distances, but she moved too far, too fast, extending herself beyond the bounds of her dimensional pocket. The necklace passed through the rift. Reality snapped like an overstressed rubber band. Emma's scream became a chorus of all her victims as the dimensional barriers she had weakened came crashing down. What have you done? She shrieked, her form beginning to dissolve as the natural laws of physics reasserted themselves. The gift, the evolution, you've doomed them all to remain trapped in their limited forms. It's so ill. The chamber began to collapse, the ghost ships breaking apart as they were pulled back toward the normal dimension. The transformed victims of the triangle felt their liquid forms solidifying, their extra-dimensional geometries flattening. Some screamed, some wept, some seemed relieved. "Emma," Jack cried, reaching for his wife with arms that were already losing their fluid nature. "Emma, my love." But she was beyond hearing. Her vast, impossible form was being drawn into the collapsing rift, pulled apart by the very forces she had tried to control. In her last moments, she reached for Liam one final time, not in anger, but in something that might have been desperation or might have been forgiveness. Then the rift closed with a sound like thunder underwater, and darkness took everything. The steady beep of hospital monitors pulled Liam back to consciousness. He was in a white room that smelled of antiseptic, an IV dripping clear fluid into his arm. Sunlight, normal, yellow sunlight, streamed through the window. "Mr. Gallagher," a nurse looked down at him. "You're in Miami, General. The Coast Guard found you floating in a life raft 3 days ago. Can you tell me what happened out there?" He tried to speak but could only cough. His throat felt raw, as if he'd been screaming for hours, or singing in frequencies human voices weren't meant to produce. Over the next few days, the story came out in pieces. The Segunda Oportunidad had been found drifting empty, its electronics fried. Captain Santos was still missing, presumed lost at sea, and all across the triangle, dozens of ships that had vanished over the years were suddenly reappearing, their crews alive but with no memory of where they'd been. The authorities blamed everything on freak weather patterns and mass hysteria. They had no other way to explain it, no way to process the truth. At night though, Liam could still hear the singing. In his dreams, he saw Emma's final moments, not as the horror she had become, but as she had been on that last day on the siren's call. In those dreams, she was always trying to tell him something, some vital warning or truth that he could never quite remember upon waking. Months later, he sat in his apartment, staring at his computer screen. He had written it all down, everything he had seen, everything he had learned about the triangle's true nature. His finger hovered over the publish button. On his TV, a news report showed scientists puzzling over strange readings from deep-sea monitoring stations. Unusual frequencies, geometric patterns in the currents, signs that something was stirring in the ocean's deepest trenches. Emma had failed to open the rift, but perhaps she had never been meant to succeed. Perhaps she had only been meant to weaken the barriers, to prepare the way for something else, something older, something patient. Liam looked out his window at the distant ocean, glittering innocently under the afternoon sun. Sometimes, when the light hit the waves just right, he thought he could see patterns in the water, fractal spirals that reminded him of a twisted silver necklace that had never been found. He pressed publish. The world needed to know what lurked behind the triangle's veil. They needed to be ready, because in the deep places of the ocean, in the spaces between dimensions, ancient things were waking up, and they were hungry for transformation.